Front and center in question period today, a bombshell report that found some parliamentarians may be wittingly helping foreign governments meddle in Canada's democracy.
The National Security Committee indicates there are members of this House that have knowingly worked for foreign hostile governments. Canadians have a right to know who and what is the information. Who are they?
The Prime Minister's known about this since March and has done nothing. And the Conservative leader doesn't even want to know what's going on.
Our government created that committee. We appreciate its work. We value its recommendations. We have always acted to put in place strengthened measures when we receive thoughtful analysis, and we'll continue to do that important work.
This as the Liberal chair of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians that released the report explains why follow-up on these cases is so difficult.
This may not lead to charges because of the problem we have in Canada with the intelligence to evidence gap. It's very difficult to get intelligence in a courtroom, in the broad daylight of a courtroom, because of course this speaks to the protection of sources and methods.
It's time to bring in the power panel. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Good to be here.
Michelle, do you think the government should be naming names and telling the public who's allegedly colluding with foreign powers?
Listen, I understand, and I too am incredibly curious, and it would only make sense that you would want to know who you're voting for in the next election. As an example, who was influenced in the Conservative race. But at the same time, it's not up to the government to mete out justice, nor is it up to them to name names. These are allegations, and incredibly serious allegations. And, one would hope that in the system of justice that we have here in Canada, that it would actually be law enforcement that would follow up. Clearly, there's some gaps that seem to be showing. And, I think as Mr. McGuinty said, it's really hard to bring these things forward because of the concerns for the sources and that. But it is we have security agencies for a reason to actually go and investigate this and to figure out what is true and what is not. But just like having a parade and naming all these names, what if they're wrong? What if the allegations aren't true? What comes of it if they are just named? I think that it's more important that if people are actually doing treasonous behavior, that they're brought forward and that they actually pay for those crimes, because they're crimes. Not just about being publicly shamed in the media, I think.
Yeah, Tim, the Conservatives, you heard them there in some of those clips asking the government to name names, asking whoever to name names. Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc saying it's irresponsible to name some of the MPs that could be involved in this. He says that's not how intelligence works. It should be kept secret. It's up to the police to come forward and name names if it gets to that point. Are you buying what the government's selling on this?
Not entirely. Look, there's some truth to that. Most certainly, you have to be careful and you have to be judicious. You can't be irresponsible. But with the release of this report from parliamentarians to the public, there's probably more uncertainty that's been created naturally. Look, JP, I'd focus on two things. The reference to some people acting wittingly and some people acting unwittingly. Could you give a definition of what that is? Could you give a definition? I know Sherelle, the editor, who always corrects me, will tell you that few is two or more. What's a few? And what's a parliamentarian under the auspices of this report? I think they can give more clarity around that because, again, we're left with this bigger black hole that is not helpful. Even when there are police incidents and investigations where information has to be guarded, more details are given than was given here. I don't know if it's naming names as much as being a bit more specific about what witting and unwitting is and what a few is and what who or what parliamentarians are. At a minimum, they can do that. That is not going to imperil national security.
That's a good point, because we actually don't know how many parliamentarians we're talking about. Also, it's parliamentarians. Is it MPs? Is it senators? Is it Conservatives? Is it Liberals? We really have no idea. Could there be dozens of people? I mean, I doubt it. But, how many people are allegedly colluding with foreign states? And Jordan, does it seem right that voters really have no idea, at this stage at least, they have no idea who we're talking about here? They could go to a ballot box next year and they could be voting for somebody who's taken directions from China or India. That doesn't seem right, does it?
No, it's totally problematic. And I think the government is really caught here because, while I acknowledge that there are some good reasons not to name those specific names, especially if evidence doesn't rise to a level that, for example, the RCMP would be following up on. At the same time, there's some obvious problems here created with the confidence in the electoral system that do need to be addressed. And I think that the government, this is one of the challenges with the NSICOP committee. On the one hand, it gives parliamentarians access to this information, but on the other hand, a lot of that ends up back on the government because the Prime Minister has had this report now since the end of March, and that's been on his desk, and it's got all those, he has those details, he has the names, he knows who's there. And so I think it's really now incumbent on the party leaders to be getting the briefings that they need to get that information, so at least they can know internally if any of their own members are involved.
Yeah, we know that the report was actually revised after it went to the Prime Minister's office as well, which is not unusual with NSICOP reports, but they delivered a more pure form of a report, and then after the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister himself reviewed it, the committee did make some changes to withhold some information. We're not sure what exactly was withheld, but we know that there are no names in this report. Sherelle, foreign interference, at least for me and maybe some other reporters, had kind of faded into the background a bit. The Justice Ugg report, it got some attention, but it didn't really move the needle all that much. It seemed like, though, this NSICOP report really changed the equation, didn't it? There's a lot more focus politically on this now that we know some really quite sinister details.
Well, of course. And then once you have the prospect of parliamentarians, being actively involved, not just necessarily, some third party trying to pull some strings and working and massaging the masses and doing all those other things. And now you're saying, oh, people are actively potentially involved. Yeah, that's going to raise some eyebrows, and that's going to generate some interest, especially because the OG report as well didn't really delve into things that we hadn't already heard, say, throughout the public inquiry. There was another phase to it coming, so there were still a bunch of recommendations that she hasn't yet made. It's interesting watching how this plays out. You've seen various cabinet ministers, especially today, being very, very tight-lipped, saying to the point that they're saying they have no opinions whatsoever, personal or otherwise, on what is in this report. Clearly, the messaging has gone out that they are to, shut up about it, and you do wonder why, again, comes back to the Liberals and their messaging. Why is the messaging kind of so weak on this? The Prime Minister has had this report since March. They've had time to craft whatever it is that they are supposed to be saying about this right now. And it does kind of seem right now that they're kind of floundering, and their best case scenario is to kind of just cast aspersions a little bit on what it is that the report says, saying that, they disagree with some elements, but not saying what exactly it is. There was something that was pulled out by our colleagues at Global News, where the public safety minister was saying, oh, maybe the members of the committee should talk to the sergeant at arms and find out what exactly foreign interference is. Like those little drops of and digs. I don't know if that's the right way to move forward on what is such an important and serious matter.
Yeah, Michelle, what do you make of their comm strategy on this? It does seem to be them saying we take this very, very seriously, and then it's up to the police. We can't do much more about it ourselves as politicians. We can't give you names because that's not allowed under existing law, yada, yada. That seems to be what they've been saying over the last couple of days. Do you think that's enough, though, politically? Can they get away with just staying mum on this, or do they have to come up with something else? So they have to have some action to put to bed what are really troubling findings in this report.
Well, that's one of the true challenges of being in government. You have access to this information. And let's be clear, I doubt that all cabinet ministers have actually seen the full unredacted report. I would suspect it's a very, very small handful of people that actually have eyes on that. And so, many of these cabinet ministers are as blind as us in many ways. They might have had a more broader briefing, but not with the details. I also think it's important to point out that the government did bring forward some legislation, right? I think it's before the House right now with respect to different aspects of foreign interference. Given that, there was some inner knowledge of the report and of some intelligence issues, that some of the concerns might be addressed in that report. But I think Tim had a really good, suggestions about, and good communications advice actually for the government. Define some things, take away some of those cobwebs about what unwitting and witting is, about how many and who. Are these past or are they current parliamentarians? What and how are they defining parliamentarian? And, just some of the some of the concerns that they're raising and the allegations that they're making, just contextualize those more without kind of, giving so much detail that you would actually be able to figure out who a person was and inadvertently name them in a different way. But I think that they could be more forthcoming in an educational way.
Tim, there wasn't a single question from the Conservatives in question period yesterday on this issue. Today, a lot more action. Poilievre was up on it. Michael Chong was trying to hold the government's feet to the fire. But how do you explain this? Team Poilievre is usually ready to jump all over the Liberals for their perceived failures. They seem a little bit quieter on this one. What's up with that, do you think?
JP, that also almost sounds like a NISCOP report there that you're giving. What's the secrecy? Why aren't they moving forward? I would say, actually, there isn't a secret there. I think part of it, there's perhaps some are wondering, are Conservatives involved? I don't know. I have no idea. But I think the politics of this, I think we probably all agree that this isn't, though it should be, penetrating the public psyche. The bigger thing for the public today in terms of information, particularly the 44% of Canadians who are renewing mortgages, is just that. It's affordability. So what the Conservatives have been good at, JP, is focusing on those economic issues. Perhaps they're trying to avoid going down into a rat hole on this, because I have not seen any polling data that suggests this is an issue that is captivating the public. And as I say, it should be. So the Conservatives have demonstrated discipline. Maybe that is why they're not going too hard on this at the moment.
Yeah, Jordan, does the country need to take it more seriously, though? Because we're talking about parliamentarians working hand in gloves, an unknown number of parliamentarians allegedly working hand in glove with foreign spies in foreign countries and sharing sensitive information from our country to theirs. Is it just going to be, we'll talk about it this week and it goes away and nothing's ever really done about it? Is that a viable solution here? Does there not need to be something else?
Clearly not. And I think that's how we ended up with a public inquiry, right? So there's obviously, as we've explored this issue through a number of different mechanisms over the last year, we've seen that there has come to bear some pressure. And I agree with Tim, mostly not public pressure. This is not an issue that's really gone outside of the Ottawa bubble, but there's now multiple investigations of various sorts, including, we're hearing today, the RCMP as well. So clearly, we're also going to get more information flowing into the river of what we know about this issue. And I do think that Canadians should feel some confidence that there's a number of processes underway where they're going to get a little bit more information about what's happening. But the challenge for the government is to look like they care about this issue and are active on it, so they can't be accused of being too slow or being too reactive or maybe trying to hide anything. The challenge for the Conservatives is similar. The fact that they were not up on this issue yesterday, I think, was a real tactical error on their part, because it circled a certain reluctance that they seem to have to talk about the topic. And of course, the fact that it's been floated that potentially Conservative leadership race might have been involved in this, I think has a lot to do with maybe their reticence to get into it. But you have to confront it head on, and you have to look as though you're just as concerned about it as you were when this was a topic coming out through other types of leaks, for example. So I think they've left a vulnerability there.
Sherelle, final thoughts to you on this topic?
Yeah, it's the Liberals do have to walk a fine line, I think. Obviously, as been said, they are the government. They are in the position where they have to safeguard national security. So it is easier for everybody else to say, open the doors, let's shine the light on it, let's see what's in there. We don't, as in the media, as observers, as opposition members, they don't have necessarily that same level of scrutiny that they have to put on everything. But it does come back around to looking like if they do have to kind of stand 2 feet down and say, absolutely not, nobody is going to look at this at all. They don't do any of the actual internal reviews that have been floated or anything like that. It's going to look like they're hiding something.
And just to underscore this point, it's not even clear if the RCMP is necessarily doing a review. They won't confirm. They say that there are investigations into a broad range of foreign interference matters, but will not provide a comment on whether there's an active criminal investigation into any parliamentarian. So they're also being tight-lipped about this. Okay, we'll leave that topic there. Canada's central bank is lowering the key interest rate for the first time in 4 years.
Our judgment today is that the Canadian economy doesn't need monetary policy as restrictive as it has been, and so we cut the policy rate by 25 basis points.
The Power Panel on the political implications of the rate cut. Next, stay with us.